Hello and welcome to a developer deep dive. So in these series of ones, going to be taking a deeper look into specific areas. So while these ones are assuming that you've got starting knowledge there in terms of you feel sort of comfortable working in the Unity editor and that you're comfortable with doing general coding there. So while they do assume that, if you're not sort of feeling fully comfortable with those areas yet, these are still something where it's good to be checking out of ideas, things you might want to be able to be applying in games, gives you potential areas you can be experimenting around with for sort of building projects. So even if you're not at the stage where you're super comfortable on that side, still worth checking out, and there still will hopefully be helpful things there. So in today's one, going to be looking at something called Cinemachine. So Cinemachine is a tool that gives us a lot of extra controls over cameras and allows us to do some really cool, really interesting things there with those. So it's time to dive into that. So the starting point for Cinemachine is we actually need to make sure we've got it installed. So to do that, we need to head up to Window and our Package Manager. And so packages are a way that we can bring additional bits of functionality into our project. So at the moment, it's just showing me the packages that are in the project. But what I can do is I want to go to Unity Registry. And so this is showing me all the various ones available. So I can select Cinemachine, and then I can select Install. Now, with some packages, you might see extra things here that you can potentially install as well. With Cinemachine, it's just the core package there. So this will take a little bit. It has to unpack all of that. It's adding in code, it's adding in things into the user interface. So those are things that do take a little bit of time there. So cool, we've got Cinemachine now installed. So let's start to look at the kind of things that we can actually do with this. So as I said, it's all about cameras. So let's first set up just a little bit of a very basic scene. So I'm just going to have my ground in here. And again, as I've mentioned in other videos, just going to make sure I'm following some nice practices in terms of making sure that I'm grouping things into proper sort of folders here for this. So I'm going to have one for my ground. And then I'm also going to have another material that is going to be for my focus target. And we'll see what I'm meaning by that in a moment. But let's get my ground one made a sort of nice greenish color and drag that on. And the focus target, just to make sure there's no danger of us missing it, let's make it a lovely magenta. And I'm going to create just a sphere, I think in this case, as my focus target. And you'll notice as I'm creating these things, I'm making a point of renaming them as I go. Again, really good habit to get into. And to make sure I actually apply the magenta color. That's better. Cool. So let's start to look at what we get with Cinemachine. So Cinemachine stuff, and it was just telling me that it was putting things under a different menu, and I did not look and see which extra menu it was putting under. So let's move to the game object menu. Cool. Well, that is good to know. So that means I can under Cinemachine. Cool. So we've got a lot of different things that we can set up here. So the idea behind Cinemachine is we have these things called virtual cameras. And so a virtual camera is something that you can move around. You can control all of our normal camera settings like near and far planes. You can control things like the field of view, all these sort of extra details like of that. But the big thing there is that virtual cameras have a priority. So we'll see this. Let's chuck in just a virtual camera. And as soon as we do that, one of the things you'll notice is a little icon appears here next to our main camera. And we'll take a look at that in a moment, because it's actually had this thing called a Cinemachine brain on it. So the job of the Cinemachine brain is to manage which of the virtual cameras are currently active. And you can have multiple active at a time and be blending between them. The brain is handling that logic there. So this camera, I'm going to call this, let's make this my overview sort of camera. Overview camera. Now I can, now if I move this camera around, that will actually change. So, because I've only got the one Cinemachine camera, that virtual camera is now the thing that I move. If I try and actually move the main camera, you'll notice I can't. So as soon as we've got the Cinemachine cameras in there, you don't ever move then the main camera. What you do is you change these virtual cameras. And there's a couple of really cool things that we can do with these. And so one of the things is we have these controls for things like the body, which is where the camera is positioned, and then we have stuff in terms of where the camera is looking. So we can actually give it a target to be looking at. So if I take the focus target and bring that over here as the look at, then what that means is as I move my focus target, the camera automatically moves to keep it in view. So this is one of the things that we get for free with Cinemachine, is this ability to have objects be able to be tracked. That's really, really handy. We can also do things though where we might want to always position this camera relative to something. So for example, we could position the camera so that it's always relative to that follow target. So in this case, now we're able to control our offset from that. So now when the target moves, the camera will actually move with it. So if I take my target and I move that, the camera is moving with it. It's following it. So we can control the body location for it. I could also make it so this might be anchored to something. Maybe this, if I go back to my scene view so I can see a little bit clearer, maybe what I have here is I have a, that is way too tall. That seems like a better size. I could maybe say that this is a camera that is positioned actually in the world. It's attached to a physical thing in the world. Let's move that up to that point. So what I'm going to do is I could now anchor this camera relative to that. So I could actually do that by a couple of different ways. So I'm going to make this the overview camera pole. So there's a couple of different ways that I could anchor this to it. And this is a way that you could do things like sort of security cameras or any sort of fixed emplacement camera type things. So my overview camera. So a couple of ways I could do this. Simplest way is what I could do is I get rid of my follow target. So I don't want it doing that. And I can actually turn off the body transposer. And then I could just position that camera here. So I can easily go and set these like that. That would be down at probably 1.25. No, probably just at 1 actually. So I could position it there, and then I could always detach it from it if I wanted. And now that camera is anchored to that pole. So again, my focus target can move around, but the camera is anchored. So it would be one way of doing it. The other way that I could approach doing this is, again, this is a bit easier to see in sort of scene view, is my overview camera there. I could set the follow target as being that not the focus target, that would be bad. I could set it as being the camera pole, and then that still will do nothing until I come here and I actually change this to, say, for example, the transposer. And then with that, I can position this just relative to that object. So this would be a handy way of, say you had a camera mounted on something, a particular camera that was mounted on something that was moving, that would be a great approach for it. So I'm actually going to switch to doing that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch this back to nothing. And so I'm going to anchor my camera back on that. And although it's not going to make a difference with the scale, I am just going to reset it just because it makes it a little bit cleaner and neater looking. So I've got my overview camera. Let's do a camera that orbits around. So that, what we can do is Cinemachine has a couple of options for that. So one of the ones that we could be using there is we can use this dolly camera with track. So this is a term from film and television, this idea of something that is moving along a particular path. And we've got a couple of options here. So these two ones do actually different things. So dolly camera with track, that will create a separate camera with its own associated track. So let's do that. And this, I'm going to call this my orbit camera. And this I'm going to call the orbit camera path. And this, I can actually just move and position these in the world. So what I'm going to do for this is, to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to center this so it's at 0, 0, 0, because these waypoints, I want to get them placed around the world. And there's a really clever thing that Cinemachine does when we are working with these. And so you'll notice here, I'm going from -5, 0, -5. The next point is 0, 0, -5. So I've moved +5 in x. When I add another point, it actually replicates that. So Cinemachine, when you go and add in a new point, and we'll see it will do it again, but that's not quite what I want in this case. This time I want that to be 5 and this to be 0. But when I add in the next one, it will continue it along again. So Cinemachine is looking at what you've, similar to what you encounter in things like spreadsheets, where as you add in particular data, it can fill in based upon the pattern that it's seeing in the data. So it can be a really useful way of getting all these points set up. So we can get all of these in, and then I'm going to say that the path is looped. So I don't need to add in that final point, it'll just join them up. Now that looks all right. But I want to move all of these. So I'm going to initially just put all of the ones up at around 5. But I can start then changing these. So I can grab 0.5 here and like, yeah, let's make it go up a little bit for that one. And maybe for 3. For this one, maybe let's make it dip down. Similar for 7. So cool. That is the path that our camera is going to follow. So this is our orbit camera, and we can see this is another way of doing the body position. We are using a tracked dolly. It's linked to the orbit camera path. Now we've got different ways we can use. So we can use these things called path units. And if we look at path units, what's happening there as it's moving along, so it gets to point 1, gets to point 2. So path units are referring to those, the number of the particular points. We could also use distance. So then it's using the actual distance in meters along the path. Or we can use this one normalized, which that's using a value from 0 to 1. So that's good if you're wanting to control sort of percentage along a path. If you're wanting to have more control based upon velocity, then the distance units is going to work really well. So that is looking pretty good so far. But the view from our camera is not particularly great. It's not the most inspiring view. But that is where we already know the solution for this. The solution is we drag in our focus target So it is looking at that. And now, as we move along this path, it's continually following it. And so it's always going to keep it in view. So it's a loop one, so we'll just always do that. So that's cool. And we've got multiple cameras in here now. Let's go a little bit further, because we saw that there was a similar sounding thing of this dolly track with cart. So this one is, so whereas dolly camera with track is if you want to have a camera that is moving around, the dolly track with cart allows you to put something else in the scene and have it move along that track. So in this case, I'm going to call this cube path, and I'm going to add a cube into the scene in a moment. And I'm going to call this the cube cart. And so again, we have to go to scene view for editing this. But what I'm going to do is similar to what I did with the other one. I'm going to bring these down to here. But these waypoints, I'm going to have them be a lot closer in. I don't want to have them be as sort of far out as they were with the previous ones. But I'm also going to simplify this a little bit in terms of where and how it's moving. Let's make that one there. That's a good spot. Oh, and yes, if you're already on a point and you try to add one, it'll go and add an intermediate point. So that can be handy if you're needing to add in some extra points in the middle there. Really super easy way of doing that. So I'm going to do that. Again, let's have a looped one. And again, let's just offset these a little bit. So 0.0 can go like that. 0.1 can go there. Perfect. I'm going to set up another material just for the cube. So material for cube, and let's make that another color. And let's bring in my cube. And all we need to do is we parent it to that cart. And I'm going to fix up its offset. And so it's set like that. Perfect. And then what we'll see is as we move this, it'll just move the cube, and you'll notice it's also making it face the direction that it's moving. So that gives us a much nicer sort of view. Speed, if I'm remembering rightly, means that when we just play this, I believe that will just automatically start moving. So we don't even need to do anything for that one to have it move. But we'll notice with Cinemachine, it's only focusing on, and I'm going to make that move way faster. Why move at 1 meter a second when we can move at 5 meters a second? There we go. We can see that movement is pretty smooth and fluid and really quick to set stuff up. So if you've got things in your scene that you're just needing to have some movement, so I've used this for things like having cars just move around a city. So that was for cases where I wasn't getting too close to the cars. So just needed to see them from a bit of a distance, and it worked really well for having them move around. So this is kind of cool. We haven't needed to do any code yet either with this, which is in particular a really nice thing with Cinemachine, that you can get so much without even adding in any code. So one of the things that we've got though is we've got multiple cameras here, but it's only ever showing us one. And so if we go and take a look at the cameras, they have this thing called a priority. So the highest priority is the one that will get shown. And we've got different ways that we can be blending between these cameras. So one option is Cinemachine. We can also have this idea of a blend list camera. So it allows us to actually blend between different ones. We've got mixing cameras. We've got a lot of different cameras that we can actually make use of. There's ones that can try and keep groups of things in shot. But let's take a look at the mixing camera. So this might actually be our main Cinemachine camera. So I'm going to call this our mixer camera. Now, the mixer camera automatically gives you two virtual cameras to start, but we can actually get rid of those. And we can bring in our orbit camera, and we can bring in our overview camera. So rather than having it be attached there, we can bring it in here. So now our mixer camera can control which one of these is going to be the priority. So let's say I make the orbit camera the priority and the overview one is at that. So what I can then do is, while I'm playing, I can just blend between these. So now it's fully the overview camera. So the mixing camera allows us to blend between ones. So our orbit camera, we notice it's not actually moving. We've got our path set up and we tested that we can move along it and that's behaving the way we expect, but it's not actually orbiting yet. So there's a lot of different ways that we can control that orbiting. We could be doing things like setting up an animation. We could be doing that via an animation through timeline. We could also be doing this through code. So I'm going to actually set up a version where we're doing it through code. So let's get our folder set up. And I'm going to set up one here, and this is going to be our orbit camera controller. So its job is going to be to manipulate our orbit camera here. So it can go onto there. So let's think about this. So first thing we need to initially be able to do is we need to have access to our orbit camera. So we're working with Cinemachine, so we need to make sure we bring in the using for Cinemachine. And then we want our, actually we don't even need to have it pick that, we can just have our Cinemachine virtual camera. And that's our orbit camera. And I always, things like of this where I know it has to be there, I like actually adopting the approach there of we require the component so that we know that it's definitely there. And then in a way, we can just make the assumption of we can do a get component of our Cinemachine virtual camera. The reason I like doing this approach is it removes the potential error of, oh, I forgot to link it up in the inspector. And also, there's assumptions that the script is making. The script is just not going to run if we don't have a virtual camera. So that means if I tried to attach that script, we can see script's happy on that. If I tried to attach this script onto here, it actually adds in a virtual camera. And I would also not be able to remove it because something's relying on it. So I'm a big fan of using approaches like of that where we are manually we're actually explicitly specifying the rules that this operates under. So that's cool. We've got that linked in there. So now we get to the interesting part of, okay, we've got to retrieve our body section here. And this is something that can be a little bit interesting with how we have to do this in Cinemachine. Because what we're retrieving here is we're actually getting a Cinemachine component. And so we need to then actually work out the particular, so I believe, I think it's a Cinemachine tracked dolly. Let me just check. So this is one of the things we do often. Cool, so I know it's a Cinemachine component base. Okay, so I know those part, that's correct. So normally we'd use get component, but it's actually get Cinemachine component. Because behind the scenes, there's actually extra things being attached on here that we can't see. We can get a bit of a peek behind the hood if we switch from normal to debug, but it still is not going to show us all of the stuff that we're sort of needing to be able to see. You can see, a little bit more, but a lot of stuff is actually hidden from us, even in the debug mode. So what we need to be doing is a little bit of it is relying on, okay, well, we know if it's something where it's a body or an aim component, transition, then we're retrieving a Cinemachine component. There's just a little thing to watch out for. So now that I've retrieved the dolly, which this I'm also going to cache up here, again, just avoids needing to do those get components all the time. So orbit, camera, dolly. I'm going to store that down here. And I am going to move this line up here. So what this would allow me to do then is that orbit, camera, dolly, I will see that I actually have access then to the path position. And I can control the position units if I wanted as well. So the path position, I am going to add in now a public variable, which, because nothing outside of this needs to access it, I like using the private serialized field option. I'm going to set up a speed setting that I'm going to start at 1. So then this is just going to be increased by speed multiplied by my time delta time. So that should just allow the orbit camera to move around nicely, and it's grumpy at me, but yep. 30 years of programming and I still miss semicolons in things. I would love to say that that is a thing that ever goes away, but it does not ever go away. But now my orbit camera, we can see it's moving very slowly. So let's ramp up the speed. Whoa, that might be a bit too fast. Want to try and not make even myself sick with that. So that's pretty good. But it also, need to remember that my speed here will reset when I stop. So I'm actually going to go for a bit of a middle ground there of 2.5. So that's pretty good. Be nice to be controlling this mixing as well. So I can actually do that. So again, I'm going to set up another script. So my mixer, camera, controller. And this one is going to be doing a couple of things. So this one is going to be controlling, that's already on there, good. So again, I need to bring in Cinemachine. And then again, now this time, there will actually be a mixing camera. So I've got my mixing camera. So for some of the ones, there is actually specific different camera components that you can access. So I want to get my mixing camera and go mixing camera, perfect. So then what I could do is, if I look at my mixing camera, then we can take a look and see what we've got in the way of options there. So I've got my different weights here. And I can also, there's actually just a nice helper function. So I can set the weight of a particular camera. So that's pretty cool. So what I want to do then is, let's set up a couplings. What I want to do is I want to be able to blend this over time. And I'm going to just use a single curve for this. So what I will set it up is, there will be a single curve that will determine the priority of the first camera, and then the priority of the second camera is always going to be the, so not exactly the opposite of that, but it'll always be 1 minus the priority of the first one. So this is where animation curves are really handy. I'm a huge fan of animation curves. There's such an easy and powerful way of controlling how things behave. Really great. Highly recommend making use of them. So this is going to be my animation curve. And so this is going to be the overview camera priority. And the other thing that I want is I want the time that this applies over. So camera, let's call it the blend time. And let's say I want to have this blending occur over 10 seconds. So what I'm going to be able to do then is I need to keep track of the time. So current time. Perfect. So first thing I'm going to do an update is current time plus equals time delta. And just as a simple reset one, there's other ways that I could do this, but I'm just going to go for this approach. If camera blend time is greater than that, then current time minus equals camera blend time. So cool. So I'm going to set the weight here to, so this is going to be for camera 0, is going to be, now I go to my overview camera priority and I evaluate. So when we're evaluating, animation curves can go over the 0 to 1 range. You don't need to keep your input as only that, and don't keep your output as only that. I like to use the 0 to 1 range with stuff because it just works better for scaling with things. So in this case, it'll be my current time divided by my camera blend time, which would give me a 0 to 1 value. So that's cool. And then the weight for camera 1, and I reckon this will work. I can then get the weight of camera 0, and this one, the weight would be that. I think that will work quite nicely. So I'm updating the current time and handle wraparound. And then here I am updating the camera weights. So let's see what this does. So we've got that set up. Now we'll need to set up the animation curve. Now I said animation curves are really, really handy to work with, and they are. And that's because just by doing that, I've now got curve here. I could be adding in extra points. I could be changing the rate of change here, the slope of this really easily. They're super powerful for being able to work with. But let's see what that does. I can see my mix result here, and that's going to be something I want to be paying attention to. So we can see that's changing. We can also see I got my order of my cameras wrong, so it's actually controlling the orbit camera priority. But that's okay, because what I can do here is I can fix that by, I just swap the order of them. So now it will start primarily with the orbit camera, and then it's going to transition into the overview one. So Cinemachine is handling all of this movement of where the cameras are. It's handling all of that placement of them. It's a really, really powerful system. And we notice we do get a jump here because it goes from 1 straight away to 0. That's fine. We can actually fix that in our animation curve by, let's add in an intermediate point, which I can right click on that and manually edit it just to get it super precise. So we've got that at a good value, and then I can right click and edit this one to 0. And then this one, these little handles here, I can use that to adjust the inclination. So now that should have a much smoother transition there, because we see it blends up and then it blends back. And so it's just smoothly varying between them. And it's going to move different amounts each time because the orbit camera itself is moving. And that's, again, Cinemachine handles those transitions really nicely. So that's pretty good. There's more that we can actually do. So our cameras here, we also can add these extensions. And so these extensions allow us to do a bunch of really interesting things. So you can do like Cinemachine post-processing. So what that allows you to do is each camera can actually have different post-processing effects applied to it. And then you can blend, but when you blend between those cameras, like we're doing here, it will blend between different post-processing effects. Incredibly powerful. So that would allow you to do things like if you wanted, different display modes, different things like that. You can do that with the post-processing. And just switch between cameras. Really easy way of blending, and you can get a really smooth transition there for it. You can have stuff where you can be attaching things like colliders, items like that allow you to have the cameras try and automatically avoid objects in the environment. A big one that I really like using is this Cinemachine storyboard one, because what that allows us to do is camera fades. So our alpha option here lets us control that fade. And we can select a particular texture. So if you had a static screen, things like that you wanted to fade in, you could be doing that. And we can control this. We'll be able to actually access and control this in code as well. So if we take a look at how we might go about doing that, we should, I'm pretty sure those come up as a component for the storyboard, so they do. So again, we have our Cinemachine storyboard, so our mixing camera storyboard. So we're retrieving that, and let's also animate that as well. So we could actually, let's tie it into this as it's doing a transition here between these initially. So my mixing camera storyboard, I can just change the alpha. There's probably, no, actually it is just a direct variable change. Some of them have, you can change the direct variable, other ones it prefers you to use a function for it. But in this case, I'm just going to make it that, this is not going to be great, but it will show us initially what's happening, and then we'll make it better. So I'm going to make it tied to the weight of the first camera. So what we should see is it fades in and out as we are actually running. So let's take a look at this. So we can watch the alpha as it's changing, and we can see it fades to white, fades back out. So that's cool. Let's make it that it's controlled independently though. So let's give it its own animation curve. So this can be our animation curve, and this can be our storyboard alpha. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to use the same progress one so we can keep everything very easily in sync. So we're going to have that. So this is going to control our storyboard alpha. Then what I can do is, after I fix the typo, I can come here, and what I want to do is, at the moment this has got just a single spike like that. I am going to make this so it has a double one. So chuck in some extra keys, and then let's edit these. So this one's value will be 1. This one's value will be 0 at 0.75, so exactly 3/4 of the, no, sorry, that one will be 1. This one will be 0 at 0.5, and then this one will be 1 at 0.25. We can square these off as well, so we've got nice smooth transitions and sort of similar transitions either side of this. That looks good. So let's see what that does. So we can run with that, and what we should see is a bit of a fade out, fades back in, fades back out again. So really nice way of controlling stuff like this. So again, very minimal code that we're needing for this, but it's giving us some really great visual effects with it. As I said, we could be changing between different stuff there with the post-processing and things like that at the same time. So there's a lot of different extra effects that we could be doing with this. And we've got a lot of different options in our camera controls. So, we have various ones that we can be doing where we've got groups of things, where we've got ones driven by the various state that things are in, a lot of setup. So I generally, the first-person character controllers that I use, and the one that I've made publicly available, which I'll chuck the link in the description below. That camera controller, it's a Cinemachine based one, so that just out of the box, that character will work with any blending, any transitions, anything like that I'm needing to do. So it's really, really powerful. Cinemachine integrates fully with things like Timeline, so it's very, very easy to work with. And you can also control how it transitions between the particular things. So the actual Cinemachine brain allows you to, it has its default blending options where it's easing in and easing out, but I can actually change these blends. So that's my main camera blends. And then I can actually adjust these. So I can control and say, okay, well, for when you're blending from the, actually I would need to set up another camera, but you could make it the blending from any camera to any other camera. You can change the style. So if you need a hard transition between cameras, you can do that by customizing these blends. You can get notifications when that happens. So if something has caused a sudden camera cut, you can actually pick that up. So you can customize these things really easily. So at the moment, it's using a ease in, ease out, but I can adjust those. Now, because the mixing camera sort of controls and manages things with these child cameras, for that, if I was wanting to be adjusting the blending, that would be stuff where I'd need to be changing things on how the mixer camera is typically behaving. So that's looking pretty solid there with that. And that's really the key things with Cinemachine. So it's something where I really recommend checking it out, getting used to using it. It's incredibly powerful. It allows you to do really great transitions very, very easily. We can set up complex scenes, we can have our dolly carts and dolly tracks going. It's something that is super powerful. Key things that we need to remember with stuff. As soon as we add in Cinemachine, which we do via the package manager, our main camera will become locked. So don't feel like it's a bug that you've added a Cinemachine virtual camera and now your main camera can't move. That's expected. It'll be the Cinemachine camera itself that you move and relocate around the scene as you need. So that's an important thing. Don't be surprised when that camera becomes locked. With your cameras, your follow setup and your body aspects, those two parts are used if you want to have your camera be moving in response to something. So if you want your camera attached onto an object and moving with that, if you want your camera following an object, then you use both the follow and the body ones. You can set up a particular transposer there for doing that. When you're wanting to look at stuff, that's where you're dealing with the look at and then the aim composer. You do have other composers for different types of things. So for trying to focus on groups of things, for just having it be hard looking at particular locations. But look at and aim at how you control where the camera is pointing. We can, if you need to change things like the field of view and the clip planes, you have to do that on the virtual camera. You can't do that on the main camera anymore. You can change them here, but if you try and change them when it's running, it'll let you, but it won't actually do anything. You need to make those changes on the virtual camera. You can have different settings for each virtual camera, so you're not constrained by they all have to have the same field of view and clip planes. They don't. You can easily blend between, have a camera be perspective, orthographic, other different modes there. So all of those things are fully controllable. Cinemachine, you can use a dolly camera if you want the camera to move along a path. You can use a dolly track and cart if you're wanting to have an object move along a path. And so those are really important ways of how you can just set up something in a scene and have it be moving without needing to do much in the way of extra logic. If you are working with stuff in code, when you're working with stuff in Cinemachine, any of those things where it's the body transposer, composes, any of those options, the AIM versions, those you retrieve them using get Cinemachine component, not get component. So get Cinemachine component is how you access those, and then you can just work with those directly. We have things like the storyboard, those extensions that allow us to do things like fades, to allow us to control things like post-processing. So lots of easy ways of working with. These I've done all in code, but I would also be able to use Timeline. Timeline's what I mostly use for that, and we will be having a look at Timeline in another video as well. I'll be looking at the Timeline system and seeing the things we can do with that. So we could do this in Timeline. We could also set up just a custom animation for doing this. So we've got lots of different ways of controlling it, and they're really, really valuable things to be looking at. So highly recommend diving into Cinemachine. Thanks, folks. That is all for this video. If you're looking for the project, you'll be able to find it up on GitHub, and I've put a link to that in the description below. If you've got any feedback, any questions, please chuck in a comment. And if you're looking to find ways to support the channel, chucking in a like or subscribing to the channel is always a big help. If you're looking to go further than that, then I do have a Patreon set up, and any support there is super appreciated. And there's a bunch of different things that you'll get as part of being a patron there. And the big thing is it's going to help me make more cool things like this, which is going to help more people like yourself to be making more games, which is awesome. And that is all for now. Thank you.